Nintendo. With the new addition of the Switch 2 to the Nintendo console family, let's take a deep look into all the history Nintendo has with both its groundbreaking and controversial releases. As always, I'm Knight, Mel's best friend, and your friendly neighborhood demon VTuber, here to give you the cold hard truth about whatever I can. Let's start at the beginning with Nintendo's origin. A card company that began all the way back in 1899 had decided to broaden their reach and branch out into other sectors, as was common for many Japanese companies. Fun fact, Nintendo may or may not have had some love hotels under its name for a while before branching into the home entertainment district. See what I did there? This is really more of an urban legend that has been lost to time, and we don't have a surefire way of confirming if this is the case or not. For the purposes of this video, however, we will primarily spend time focusing on family and home console releases with a touch on handheld releases, but primarily those will be saved for another video. Nintendo's first set of consoles were a not so well remembered set called the Color Game TV series. Originally started in 1977, there is not much to note except that these consoles were Japan only, and most of the series shared different variations of the same game, Pong. Sometimes labeled as tennis, hockey, or even volleyball, it was still the same game. These consoles sold approximately 3 million units in total, and their prices ranging from 9,800 yen to 15,000 yen. The Racing 112 model was a special style since it included a built-in steering wheel and a full racing game. This was unique since it wasn't a Pong game. These consoles were really a marketing tool from Nintendo's point of view, as they planned to use the low entry price to get into the home entertainment market. It wasn't until the NES that Nintendo really became a name for generations to come. Known as the Famicom in Japan, the NES was an amazing console for Nintendo to test the US market to see whether or not they would have a future in home entertainment and gaming within North America. The NES released in 1983 in Japan and 1985 in the United States, initially as a test, with the full launch coming later in 1986 to North America. At launch, the NES costed nearly $200, which translates to a little over $590 in 2025. To date, the NES sold about 62 million units worldwide, setting the fundamental blueprints for Nintendo and other console manufacturers for years to come. This console was massive in helping fix the video game crash of 1983 and proved that game design left much to be desired and a hungry market that was ready to be fed. IPs like Zelda, Metroid, and Mario were first released on this console. If you ever want to know the success Nintendo had with the NES, look no further than the shelves of your local Target, Best Buy, or even Walmart. The Nintendo games and the Switch would not be here today were it not for the monumental success of the NES. I mean, come on. Look at how much these guys have milked the Mario IP over the years. One cool thing Nintendo continued to do was support the NES consoles with repairs, albeit in Japan only, up until 2007, which means that they supported this console for roughly 24 years. Can you imagine Nintendo doing something like that today? We had to file a class action lawsuit to get them to fix the faulty Joy-Cons that they knew were faulty. And it looks like even now, rather than fixing the problem, Nintendo has decided to just stop us from filing another lawsuit with their new arbitration clause. In the Switch 2 Terms of Use, you can read more about this. Thanks, Nintendo. Up until 2007, they proved their commitment to gamers with the NES. Like everyone else, I wish they kept this level of care for the gamers instead of turning against their fan base with some of their later decisions. SNES was more of a mid-cycle upgrade, I would argue, to the NES system. The SNES originally came out in 1990 in Japan and to North America in 1991, selling roughly 49 million units worldwide. Costing the same as its older brother nominally, at $199 1990, which would translate to roughly $490 today. It was also known as the Super Famicom and the Super Comboy. The SNES was the best-selling 16-bit console of its time. Granted, it didn't do as well as the original NES. It did, however, make Nintendo's IPs even stronger than they were. It's astounding what Nintendo was able to do in a mid-cycle upgrade. Now, if we take a close look at their controller designs, they drastically changed. There isn't much else to be said for this console. It was generally a solid release and considered to be the best-selling console of the era. Unfortunately, however, the SNES did have fierce competition against the Sega Genesis, so it wasn't able to match the success that the NES had. The first real disaster console Nintendo released was the Virtual Boy. And boy, oh boy, was this a dumpster fire. Released in 1995 with 14 games ever made to its name, this console only sold a mere 770,000 units. It was the first true 3D experience with its monochrome display that created a parallax effect simulating true depth. Taking a deeper look at this abomination, it makes you feel like you are getting ready for an experimental eye treatment that will leave you blind in 4 months. A lot of people actually became dizzy and sick, and we don't know if that was due to the awful screen comprised of 224 LEDs that would shine directly in your eyes from such a close distance, or if it was the ability to play all of 14 games with the egregious price tag back in 95 of roughly $180, which translates to approximately $380 in 2025. Granted, that's not as bad as the Switch 2, but this console clearly underperformed as Nintendo decided to not even launch it in Europe or Australia. For all of its flaws, Nintendo made a pretty cool concept with a unique 3D visual system, but it for sure left much to be desired. However, without this console, it is possible we never would have gotten the 3DS, since they both do share the same technology. The Nintendo 64 was initially sold in 1996, selling almost 33 million systems in its lifetime. This was a great console with many great games that are even played today. This was also the first major console to feature 3D depth in its gameplay. Not 3D like the Virtual Boy with true depth, but 3D like how we would play it today. It allowed your friends to play games like Mario Kart in 3D with all the wackiness that came with it, imagining Pokemon come to life and not just stay in the 2D realm on the Game Boy. This was now a full possibility with the introduction of Pokemon Stadium, watching and seeing for the first time the full size of all 151 Pokemon from the original Pokédex. If you haven't caught on yet, I am a huge Pokemon nerd, but more on that later. Some people even go as far as to claim that the weird tripod-looking controller is the most comfortable controller of all time, citing the middle joystick as their favorite. With the Nintendo 64 release came Super Mario 64, the first true 3D Mario game, bringing Mario and characters, obstacles, and the environment all to life. As a game that is heavily speedran even today, Super Mario 64 had an impact that Nintendo of America's chairman at the time hoped for when he said, quote, "We're convinced that a few great games at launch are more important than great games mixed in with a lot of dogs." The launch not only broke records, but once again showed its competition that Nintendo was a force to be reckoned with. The GameCube. Many childhood memories for so many people from this one console. At $199 back in 2001, when the console first launched, this would equate to roughly $370 today. This little cube with the startup jingle made everyone happy. With only 22 million sales under its belt, it seemed Nintendo was consistently making less and less sales with each launch as the competition kept winding up. This, however, did not slow Nintendo's roll. Instead, it did the exact opposite. And man, oh man, did this console deliver. Cutting-edge new stereoscopic 3D graphics, which created real competition against the Xbox and PS2 consoles. coupled with their own suite of Nintendo exclusive games, gave them a true edge. However, the GameCube saw itself get skipped over for certain titles like the GTA series entirely. By the end of the console generation, while the GameCube never came close to the PS2 in sales figures, it came out ahead of the Xbox and solidified second place for this generation. And that brings us to the Wii. Oh, the Wii. So many good, nay, amazing things about this console. Selling over 101 million units after being released in 2006, the Nintendo Wii cemented itself as one of the best-selling consoles of all time. At $249 in 2006, which would equate to roughly $400 in today's money, the Wii was the first jump up from the original $199 price tag that the console had shared since the NES. Since both the GameCube and the Wii were disc-based, Nintendo made one of the most impactful decisions by allowing the consoles to be completely backwards compatible. That's right, all you had to do was plug in your GameCube controller and throw in the GameCube disc, and you could directly play the same games on your brand new Wii. The surreal feeling of turning this console on and being able to play games like tennis with your family with just a controller in your hand made this the centerpiece for so many families for years to come. And along with the fact that they played GameCube games just fine, if your old GameCube decided to give out on you, there wouldn't be a problem. You could just continue using the Nintendo Wii like you had used your GameCube in the past. Nintendo also secured its spot against Sony and Microsoft, beating sales for both the PS3 and the Xbox 360, becoming the best-selling console of this generation. The Wii was so much more than a gaming console. It allowed for families to do yoga together, create their own avatars in the form of Mii's, and so much more. With the unique controllers, there was no need to be wired to the console anymore. Your entire living room could be a play area. Granted, only if you were able to remain close to that stupid light bar. This console was so impactful, it pushed its competition to release products like the Xbox Kinect and the PlayStation Move, both of which never lived up to the popularity of the Wii. While the Wii sold well and performed great as a media center, it was only ever a casual gaming sister in the eyes of the true gamers. With the Sony and Microsoft counterparts having a much higher appeal due to the higher performance and just an easier time playing the games, why would anybody pick up a Wii for pure gaming? Do you guys remember trying to play a shooter on the Wii? Well, I do, and man, was that a disaster. It really seemed like the Wii was not made for these games, and the only way to enjoy games like Scarface or Call of Duty or GTA would have been to hook up one of the Wii Pro controllers if the game was even available on the Wii at the time, and there was no way for it to compete against the PS3 or the Xbox 360 as they were already well established for playing these types of games. The Wii was great for games designed specifically to use the Wii controllers, but it didn't matter as the Wii will always remain a household name. It's a tablet. It's an accessory. No, it's the Wii U. A brand new console aimed to nudge the Wii out, but it was so poorly marketed. I remember as a kid looking at the advertisements for the Wii U and thinking that it was just a new tablet to use with my Wii. Released in 2012, the Wii U came at another price increase of $300 for the base set and $350 for the deluxe set, which translates to approximately $420 and $490 respectively. The Wii U saw a myriad of issues, but the biggest was that it was not able to distinguish itself from its predecessor. The gamepad was a revolutionary idea that was poorly executed, extremely poorly. With its low battery life and short range, the expectations of the console and the tablet were shattered. However, when it worked, it was a fun experience, especially being able to do things like use the touchscreen on the gamepad to activate Batman's suit powers in Arkham City. However, besides the gamepad, the controllers were the same as the Wii, the console looked roughly the same as the Wii, and it seemed to have its own version of Wii Sports bundled in, which was marketed as Nintendo Land. Yes, I know they were different, but for the sake of this video, we're gonna go with that most buyers didn't know that they were that different. So you might ask, why would anybody pick this console up? It seems that Nintendo fans all shared these questions, as sales for this console catastrophically plummeted to 13 million, around 1/10 of the Wii's original sales. There was a change in the marketing direction and a better release for some of the later games, but the damage was done. This console was doomed from the start. The Wii U also dropped support for GameCube games while internally being able to fully handle them under its hardware. Another bad decision made by Nintendo execs that showed how out of touch the company was in some cases. There were some games that definitely stuck out from this console generation and carried some success, most notably being The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which was also later re-released on the Switch. And that brings us to the Nintendo Switch. Objectively one of the best consoles of all time. For kids and adults alike, the Nintendo Switch brought back Nintendo from the failure that was the Wii U. Priced at $300 in 2017, which would equate to roughly $390 today, the Switch has sold to date 152 million units, making it the third best-selling console of all time. The Switch brought together Nintendo's handheld line and the family console line into one. The 3DS, DS, and now the Wii U were all into one system. This new console had a dock which could set up and work as the family console, but it could easily also be taken on the go. Since the console boasted nearly 6-hour battery life at launch, the problems of the Wii U gamepad were now gone. However, it must be said, were it not for the Wii U, it is possible this console never would have worked or had the success that it does. The removable controllers from the Switch allowed for easy multiplayer on the go, or a proper handheld controller that didn't contain the full bulk of the screen ready to use at any given point. At launch, the Switch had a lackluster game library, and even though it was fully incompatible with previous generations, it still performed really well. Comparing against the now previous generation, Breath of the Wild was re-released on the Switch and was originally released on the Wii U. This game was able to run completely in handheld mode, which was revolutionary for the console space and definitely made systems like the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally today possible. There is so much love and support for the Switch today because it caters to everyone. If you want to sit down and play your games on your big screen after a long day of work, you can do that. If you want your children to not be bored on a road trip, you could now do that with the same system. And that is what truly made this console amazing. However, for every amazing detail, there has to be some flaw somewhere. Well, for starters, the advertised 6-hour battery life wasn't exactly 6 hours. It could get close in some instances, but for the most part, you would still have to carry a charger with you. The Joy-Cons. These were the worst of it. Like I touched on earlier, a full class action lawsuit had to be filed for Nintendo to do anything about the Joy-Con failures, and thankfully now, you're able to ship your controllers into Nintendo free of charge, they'll refurbish it and ship them back to you. However, they refuse to acknowledge that they did anything wrong and they couldn't have made this better. They most likely knew about this beforehand. Prior to the lawsuit, Nintendo's go-to response was to just purchase another $80 set of Joy-Cons. That basically made zero sense since the console itself was $300. Come on, Nintendo, could you please just stop screwing over your loyal fans who care so much about the IPs that you make? The fans that grew up with games like Pokemon and Mario? Instead, Nintendo began charging for online services following Sony and Microsoft and charging crazy prices for their controllers and other accessories. And finally, that brings us to the Switch 2.
$450.
Price tag in 2025, which would translate to
$450
in today's money. Nominally the most expensive console ever released, the Switch 2 is meant to be an upgrade for the Switch, but there's so many concerns with this launch. To get a more in-depth view covering some of the previous controversies surrounding its release, please see my besties video up here. Instead, I will be focusing on some of the newer things, like the controversy with Nintendo being able to brick your device because they don't like the way you touched your own device. Let me repeat that. If you touch your device in a way Nintendo does not like, they can just stop it from working. More and more, Nintendo is leading us to believe that we do not own anything. Even after selling this console, the people who bought it don't own it, but they want you to feel like you do until you don't. This is still extremely unacceptable, but Nintendo doesn't care. Instead, they want it to be known that you are their consumer to do whatever they want with you. But Knight, you might ask, They fixed the Joy-Cons that they got a giant lawsuit over, right? Right? Nope. All they had to do was a simple fix. Granted, it would have cost them slightly more money, but at
$450.
I was expecting it, and they chose not to implement it. Instead, they opted for similar, if not the same joysticks as the Switch one. You might then say, oh well, if they did that, then we could sue them again, right? Right? Wrong again. A clear violation of our 7th Amendment is being forced to agree to forced arbitration with our use of the console. Basically, you're signing away your rights when you start using the console. Good luck suing them in a class action now. They'll just bury the issue before it makes its way to the public. Thanks, Nintendo. I guess we will have to wait and see how this product does. I do seriously hope that the people will vote with their wallet and Nintendo will finally listen to fans again. I, for one, will not be buying the Switch 2 for a long time, if ever. If you liked what you saw, please comment and subscribe. If you like this type of content, letting us know helps a lot. I'm Knight, and have a great rest of your day.